Thank you. Let my timer on, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here today at the Turkish AI Summit, and I would like to thank to all the Turkish AI initiative members and organizers for this amazing program and for their kind invitation. As Mr. Kerem introduced, my name is Sedef Akınlı Koçak, and I'm the project manager at Vector Institute, where I provide AI project development and management to support collaborations between our industry sponsors, as well as our sponsors and researchers in building and applying innovative AI technologies to address challenges. So today I have a great honor to introduce Cameron Schuler. He is the Chief Commercialization Officer and VP of Vector Institute, and he's my boss. Hello, Cameron, and welcome.
Good morning, Sedef. I do want to say it's an honor to be invited to speak, so thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you. So I've been working with Cameron since 2018, and I'm the first full-time dedicated project manager at Vector. So since 2018, we accomplished many successful applied projects with our sponsors and partners that we are going to talk about in later. So first off, I would like to start with giving a short introduction to Vector to our audience who may not be familiar with Vector Institute. So Vector Institute is an independent, non-for-profit research institute with its mission to lead Ontario's effort to build and sustain AI-based innovation, growth, and productivity in Canada by focusing on the transformative potential of machine learning, especially deep learning. The institute was launched in March 2017 with a generous support from the Government of Canada, Government of Ontario, and private industry, and in partnership with the University of Toronto and other universities. So we work together with our AI partners in other parts of Canada with Canadian industry and public institutions to ensure that they have the people, they have skills and resources to be best in class at the use of AI. So under the umbrella of Pan-Canadian AI strategy, Vector was founded by a visionary academics from University of Toronto and entrepreneurs who faced challenges in creating commercial AI technologies. So some of the founders are, like you probably know, very famous Geoffrey Hinton, who is a professor of computer science at the University of Toronto. Sanya Findler, professor of computer science and executive director of NVIDIA Toronto Lab. Raquel Urtasun, professor of computer science at the University of Toronto. Tommy Potanen is an entrepreneur and chief AI officer at TD Bank. And Ed Clark. Ed Clark is the former president and chief executive officer of TD Bank Group. So in 2017, the Government of Canada appointed Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CFAR, to develop and lead a Pan-Canadian artificial intelligence strategy, which is the first national AI strategy. So Cameron, you've been in this domain since 2008, if I remember correctly, and you're one of the authors of the Pan-Canadian artificial intelligence strategy, which is the world's first national AI strategy. So can you give us some of the highlights of the strategy and how the strategy enabled Vector to attract and retain top talent?
Definitely. Thank you for that introduction to Vector too. So just to let you know the speed that Vector's grown, in 4.5 years, we've gone from roughly 10 people to about 2,000, which includes researchers, students, staff like Sedef and myself. And so it's been a lot of fun. We're funded roughly a third by the federal government, a third by the province of Ontario, and a third by industry. So industry has committed roughly $90 million to Vector to help achieve our mandate. So the Pan-Canadian AI strategy came out of a recognition that Canada had the good fortune to invest in AI very long term. So when Sedef mentioned that I've been in the field since 2008, it had been a field that was considered to have no economic benefit, and there weren't many people in it. In fact, globally, you could go by first name. If it was Jeff, you knew you meant Jeff Hinton. If it was Rich, you knew it was Rich Sutton. And because of that, what happened is when AI had leaps and bounds forward, which was Jeff Hinton and a couple of his students, in 2012, all of a sudden industry got incredibly excited about artificial intelligence and started taking people out of academia. And so Canada has three of the top brains in the world in AI. So one of them is Jeff Hinton, one is Rich Sutton, one's Joshua Bengio. And they happen to be in each of the cities that are the primary institutes for the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. So what the strategy was truly a strategy to ensure that we could retain the talent that we had in Canada and capitalize on that benefit. So it does a few things. So one, it allows us to recruit new faculty. It allows us to retain existing faculty, and then it funds research, computing, and physical infrastructure. So due to COVID, there aren't many people in the office, but we do have offices and we do have physical presence that bring people together. And so that was the starting point, recognizing that's how we train students and that's how we train the next generation of talent. And why is that important? Ultimately, these enterprise sponsors that I mentioned, as well as smaller companies, we have roughly 50 of them, are, when Sedef brought up our mission, that our goal is to help them compete globally, that's what my part of Vector does. So Sedef is one of the people that helps with that. So again, it's about recruiting and retaining talent, and then growing the proficiency of AI application in companies.
Thanks, Cameron. So our one of the goal of this strategy is to attract and retain world-class AI researchers, as you mentioned. So this strategy also covers like a foster a collaborative AI ecosystem and advanced national AI initiatives. As you mentioned, we have also like two other AI institutes around Canada, so AMI and MILA. And it also covers the understanding societal implications of AI. So Vector also translates AI expertise to Canadian companies and to support the ecosystem of industrial leaders in the commercial application of AI. So as a Chief Commercialization Officer at Vector, how do you see Vector's contributions to businesses and industry, and how this evolved since 2017?
So in 2017, funny story, Vector was actually in an old building in Toronto, and we were actually in the morgue. So it used to be a hospital. So it was that tiny and that small and in the basement. And so in terms of developing programs, we recognized a few challenges with AI. So one is that it truly is transformative, but the challenge with it is leading edge AI is still very hard to do. So there are certainly a number of packages or a number of libraries you can load up in Python, and there's open source tools you can get some good utility out of. But to do the truly leading edge things requires a lot of computing and a lot of knowledge. So we recognized, as I mentioned earlier, it was a very small group of academics that were still in the field, and when industry was demanding people, there just weren't that many. So when we take a look at how Vector contributes to business, it certainly is around the talent side. So we give companies preferential access to recruiting talent because we want the talent that we grow to stay in Canada. And by doing that, you have to have opportunities to stay in Canada because they can go anywhere in the world. And so for us, it really is helping our corporate partners, both big and small, as well as some government entities like the healthcare system and other parts of government, be good receptors and create good opportunities for students to actually stay in Canada. So for us, there is a shortage of talent. And so our ability to actually help them adopt, help them learn new methodologies, and help them to actually deploy that in their day-to-day business. So helping the companies apply AI for economic benefit.
Thank you so much. I would like to introduce now our industry innovation team and our collaboration project. So Vector has an industry innovation team where I work, and this team leads industry collaborations for driving the commercial impact of AI. So as you mentioned, Cameron, our industry innovation project brings industry and researchers together to apply state-of-the-art solutions to specifically industry-related challenges. such as like anomaly detection or defect detection, or like improving contact center performance and customer experience and so on. So program participants or like project participants benefit from collaboration with peers without sacrificing the key business information or competitive advantages. And they're also able to conduct project experimentation on computing infrastructure that maybe otherwise be impractical or like a prohibitively expensive to access, because like some of the maybe big enterprises has those kind of computing power, but the others may not have. So could you give us some examples? Before giving us an example, can you explain our model at Vector and then give us some of the success and visibility examples?
Yep. So we have, when I was mentioning earlier what we do with industry, so part of it is around recruiting, part of it is around training. So there is a shortage of talent, and there will be for the foreseeable future. So how do we actually take existing people that have the skills to learn how to use AI and upskill them, and then also keeping them on the leading edge of AI? And so we have a number of programs around training and upskilling. We have a number of programs around what is the latest in AI. So an example of this would be, there's roughly 15,000 papers a year, probably more than that, published in our domain. So we take a look at what are the things we think our company, our corporate partners should know about, and we actually have seminars on that. So again, these are highly technical. These are things where you actually need people that have the skills to be able to read research and be able to translate that. And when I talk about training, there's things that look like courses or workshops. So they can be intensive 1 to 3 day programs, or they can be longer term, where it's maybe classes every week. We'll call it home. They are applied. So you start out with having to understand how you want to apply a particular methodology to your business. And then as you learn the fundamental skills of that technology, at the end, you're actually going to create something for your employer. So it's directly applied to what they want to do. Now, Sedef had mentioned, pardon me, that we do projects. And in a traditional project, you'd say, okay, these are my resources and this is what we're going to build. But Sedef has a particularly challenging job where she has to figure out what we need to build. And so there's a lot of ideation that happens up front. It happens across my team. So as we understand what our companies need, and we understand what we can help them learn and how we can help them grow, we create things that we call projects. They can come in a variety of different forms. So one of them would be what we would call a thought leadership project. So we have our industry sponsors fall in a number of different categories. So we have financial institutions, which are banks, insurance companies, and we have our first pension fund that we got this year. We have what I would call ICT, so information and communication technologies, and that would be companies like Google, NVIDIA, TELUS is a telco that we have, companies like that. Then we have consulting firms, so the 5 largest consulting firms in the world we have as industry sponsors. And then we have companies that we would call industrials. So that would be groups like Magna and Linamar, who build tier 1 suppliers to the automotive industry. We have Air Canada, which is an airline, and companies like that. So fairly broad cross-section of different types of industries. But on the financial side, as you can imagine, if you get a bunch of companies in the room to work on things together, in Canada, it's illegal to collude. So we couldn't come together and work on things that are competitive. So our 5 big banks, plus we have 2 other groups that have banks. The 5 big banks in Canada have roughly 90% market share in Canada, and they have global operations. So if we all got in a room and worked together on things that were competitive, we'd actually go to jail, and nobody wants to do that. So we can focus on things that are pre-competitive. As you can imagine, none of these companies want to actually give their competitor an advantage over them, but we're very good at convening companies together. So one of the things we worked on was we had over 120 participants and 13 different companies involved, was how should the regulatory environment deal with AI-based risk models? So how do you deal with some of the challenges around explainability, trustworthiness of it, making sure there's no bias? And we actually put together and we worked with the regulators as well. So we worked with the Bank of Canada, we worked with the regulator of financial institutions, the Ministry of Finance, both federally and for our province of Ontario. So included a lot of different groups in this to get feedback. We could come together with one common voice saying, when it comes to AI-based risk models, these are the things that are important. So that's a thought leadership model. But we also do things, projects that would be more experiential learning. So the way I would describe that is you roll up your sleeves and actually work on things specifically. So since that's what Sedef does, I'm going to actually ask her to describe some of those. So we'll start out with something we call the NLP project. So I'll turn it back to you, Sedef, to describe that.
Thanks, Cameron. So you explained very well in the financial institution project, which was our first project. It's called Thought Leadership. And we have also knowledge transfer based project, which are a little bit more technical. So we always bring this analogy. So we are not giving the project participant a fish. So we are showing them how to fish. So in the NLP project, our aim was to retrain transformer-based large-scale deep learning language models to reduce the cost of training while increasing the accessibility and benefit for businesses and researchers. So as you can imagine and perhaps experience already, that developing and employing NLP models in the industry has become progressively more challenging as model complexity increases, considering the recent release of Megatron and Turing NLG with 530 billion parameters. So, and data sets grow in size and computational requirements rise, right? So these hurdles limit the accessibility of many organizations have to NLP capabilities, putting the significant benefits advanced NLP can provide out of reach. So on the way to move forward in the research and practice in this NLP breakthrough is to collaborate. In this step, the Vector took the lead with its researchers, students, and industry sponsors to join forces to move forward together to understand the latest progress in the NLP models, so no one left behind. So there were around 60 participants from 16 Vector-sponsored companies. The project was conducted in 3 phases over around 12 months. During the project, Vector provided participants with a shared computer cluster for development and deployment of the NLP models. Towards the end of the project, it was the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also create a special interest group with the objective of developing question and answering approaches that can help the medical community, medical practitioners to high priority scientific questions. So during the project execution and after the completion, participant companies demonstrated great successes by implementing some of the technologies that they experimented in the project. For example, Bank of Montreal AI capabilities team, participants, and Vector researchers, they pre-trained the language model using several online financial news sources towards creating tools for analyzing market sentiment. Another example is creating a new business line for companies. For example, Manulife Financial Corporation, which is Canadian multinational insurance company. So they developed NLP Center of Excellence out of their experience with Vector Institute and this project. And I also would like to briefly talk about the recent project, which is dataset shift and potential remedies, because dataset shift is really important. So let's imagine that we have a model using historical data from the last 10 years to predict emergency calls for next month. Or what about a model to predict it like a toilet paper sales? Do you trust the reliability of these predictions? So as a response to pandemic and the drastic shift that brought about the citizen and consumers' behavior, this project was launched and completed last year with 15 participants. And we looked at a different data sets, cross-sectional time series and image data sets. And those data sets align with the participant interests and reflect the current application potential in their organization. So all of the participants developed their proficiency in the data set shift detection, identification, and correction methodologies. And they also established best practices with the latest academic and industry standards. So I would like to go back to the Pan-Canadian AI strategy and how it impacted some of the key areas. The recent research from Global Advantage, they showed that the strategy has accelerated employment, innovation, and business growth in the AI sector in Canada. Additionally, a number of key actions led to Canada's leadership in the AI sector. So, Cameron, what are your insights about those actions, such as supporting startups, focusing equally on fundamental research and commercialization, and so on?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, as Vector started, we had to start developing programs, and as the organization matures, the way we looked at it is there's startup phase, there's kind of a growth phase and a scale-up phase, and now is a little bit more operational. So we were fairly closed. We only dealt with sponsors. We did a little bit of public outreach. By the way, if you follow our Twitter feed, we actually do post public events on there. And today, sometime, I'm not sure it's out yet, we're actually going to post our ecosystem report, which will actually tell you what happened in the Ontario ecosystem, which is connected to Vector and AI. So it's things like how much investment, both venture capital, as well as what companies put into it, as well as employment and patenting and things like that. So when we started out, if you take a look at our large enterprise sponsors, they're mostly Canadian companies that are headquartered here, but they're big multinationals. One of them, I think, employs about 400,000 people. Then when we take a look at our smaller companies, these are companies that really are on the leading edge of AI. And so one of them would be Deep Genomics, who's one of our founders, a guy named Brendan Frey, who is working on, we'll call it the pharmaceutical business for ease of description. And ultimately, if we don't support that part of the ecosystem, we're really not going to have the next growth piece. So one of our other sponsors is a company named Shopify, who you may be familiar with. And I think its market cap was around $5 million or something, or $5 billion or something like that when it started. It's now the biggest company. When we started Vector, it's now the biggest company in Canada. And so ultimately, we need to support those because you need to both help existing industry as well as companies that are going to grow into those next big multinationals. So I think those are incredibly important pieces. And as time goes on, we're now actually focusing even more. This will also come out today on the small and medium enterprises. In Canada, those are defined as companies with less than 500 employees. And they can be traditional companies, so they could be in the manufacturing space, or we have a lot of mining and natural resource extraction in Canada, or they could actually be new startups, and so a broad range of industries. So we recognize that we need to be the catalyst for those companies to adopt new AI methodologies to help them be more competitive and also to help them grow their business.
Yes, great. Thanks, Cameron. I also put the projects, some of the project reports that I mentioned and Cameron mentioned, dataset shift report and NLP project report on the chat. So if one of our audience are interested in learning more about those projects and then what are the lesson learns, I think the lesson learns and best practices are important. We are also still learning from all of these projects. So we talk about a national strategy and the importance of talent and research and Vector's role in developing the cutting edge AI technologies. So now we are advancing AI technologies and we are advancing algorithms. Also, we need to look at how we can explain these algorithms. Like explainability is important under the umbrella of trustworthiness of AI. The ethics and privacy. Privacy was mentioned right before our panel. It was a great presentation from Patricia Tain. So she and Private AI, she and her company, so they made a great improvement on the privacy enhancing technologies. So at Vector, we are also focusing on this area, and we recently started a new knowledge transfer project, which is called Privacy Enhancing Technologies, where we are exploring those technologies, the benefits of those kind of technologies, and how we can implement those technologies in the business lines. So my last discussion point, I know we have like 5 minutes left, is about like a key messages and recommendations. So what would be your key messages or recommendations to our audiences, our businesses and industries and startups on their journey of adopting AI technologies in this very fast changing environment?
Yeah, so AI certainly isn't a fad, and I think it's incredible that Turkey's actually dedicated a week to AI. I think that's incredible foresight. So when you think about how we've had to change over a very short period of time, it's listening to your companies. And so Sedef mentioned our privacy enhancing techniques bootcamp. That came from two things working with companies. So one is, what are the methodologies they need to use in order to advance their mission as organizations? And this can include healthcare. We have nationalized healthcare here, or you can take a look at more broadly some of the other government areas we deal with. But ultimately, it's recognizing that they can't necessarily do academic courses. There's space for that, and that's where you get some expertise. But I think on the it's really listening to them saying, hey, it's hard for us to get a day a week over 12 weeks, but we can actually send somebody off for 3 or 5 days to actually learn something, come back and use it, because then it certainly feels like more applied. So it's certainly learning about industry and what industry needs so we can better meet their needs. One of the questions Sedef asked me that I waited until now was, why is research still important? Why is academic research still important? And this is how you attract top talent. And so just for context purposes, if you have heard the name Jeff Hinton, he is actually, the way we would measure academic output is based on number of citations, is one of the ways we look at it. And Jeff is the most cited computing scientist in the whole world, in all of history, and he is also the most cited person in all of our artificial intelligence. So lots of people want to work with Jeff. And so there will be particular academics that are up and coming who we want to attract, and Jeff will say, hey, if that person comes, I'll do some work with them. So that's incredibly important for them. So if you think about that part of it, which is growing your academic talent, because that's how you train. And so that's been a great advantage for us. And going back to what happens in Canada, we have Joshua Bengio in Montreal, and we have Richard Sutton in Edmonton. So again, there's top talent that attracts other top talent. So that for us has been an incredible advantage. But what happens if you are in a position where you don't necessarily have that top talent, you're trying to grow that? I think there's lots of opportunity to actually, it's a growing field. There's lots of opportunity to take a look at how you're going to apply this technology. So what types of industries do you have, and what areas are appropriate for AI? Because AI is not magical. It's not something that applies to everything. The way I take a look at it is data mining is valuable. Well, first of all, everything's built on data. So you get lots of people saying, if only we could do this. You're like, and pick anything that would be an incredible business application. We could read people's minds. Great. How do you actually get that data? So if you don't have the data, you can't actually do the AI on top of it. But the first step is actually data mining. So understanding where your opportunities are. Your next step really would be around AI, and that's actually maximizing your opportunities and optimizing it. So you sit there and take a look at your industries and say, okay, based on our industries, here's areas where AI can really make a difference. Find examples where people are already utilizing it, or find things that look like it. And what do I mean by that? So in things like capital markets, because that's part of my background, you're trying to solve answers that don't really have a perfect answer, right? The whole world is an optimization problem, so you're trying to find the best answer. So ultimately, take a look for being able to actually pricing is not necessarily the right example, but it's easy to talk about. So the ability to take a look at how you would actually rank something. And so you may not be able to figure out what your best winner is, but you can sit there and say, what's your highest probability of winning? So things like game theory. Another example that translates over is healthcare. So if you take a look at the likelihood of a patient who has cancer dying, that also fits very well into, so you're actually forecasting mortality based on where the patient is today, how much time would they have before they die. And that's actually very similar to taking a look at client churn. So how long are you going to keep a client? And if you can forecast that sort of thing, then you can actually understand, is this a client we want to keep? And if this is a client that we want to keep, can we actually understand what to do to keep them? And can we actually, if we can forecast that in advance, you can actually continue on with the clients that you have, and you can help grow your business in that way. So there's a lot of parallels that take some creative thinking, but I think it's really going to be the application of AI is going to help companies win. And so truly taking a look at what exists already, partnering with academic institutions is important, and ultimately being researchers in the right way. And what do I mean by that? If they're motivated by money, they wouldn't have gone into academia. So ultimately, they want to know, what interesting problems do they get to solve? What data do you have? And what other big brains do they get to work on? So giving them challenging problems is something they also enjoy. So ultimately, it really is about attracting the right talent to solve the right problems.
You made a point, Cameron. Thank you so much. So, and then you also made a point on the data-centric AI. So I think the recent discussion around the shifting from model-centric AI to a data-centric AI. And then I think this is also important because like a data is important. Data is the value. We've all been saying that. And then finding the right people, finding the right talent, and partnering with academics, and not only academics, partnering with the other industry partners. I think this is like a collaboration in this environment is also important, not working in the solo. So with that, I would like to thank you, Cameron, for your thoughts and for sharing your insights and experiences. And I would like to get back to Mr. Kerem.
Thank you very much. And hopefully we can do this in person at some point.
I hope so, after the pandemic, probably.